All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. A beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chav Daled. We are picking up on Chav Gimel Amud Beis, and we left off at the two dots. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom on Chav Gimel Amud Beis, 23b. Our shir this morning is dedicated by our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Adar Beis. This is Leah Sol, dedicating the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of all those who helped to make a meaningful and uplifting, groundbreaking. We thank Leah for her dedication and generosity. And with that, let us begin. So the Gemara says, Shnayim shekidshu shtei achayos. So let's remember again, we are continuing with the Mishnah that we saw on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Beis that gave us quite a number of fascinating and exciting and strange cases. Remember again, we started with a very simple baseline case, which was an individual. Simple. It's amazing how Yevamos changes your perceptions of what's simple and straightforward. So again, we started with the case ultimately of the man who was Mekadesh, a woman, one of two sisters, just unsure which sister. Every one of the subsequent cases branched out from that. So we went from that to a case where he was alive, to a case where he passed away, had a surviving brother. We then went ahead and kind of branched out from that into two men to two sisters. Two men with brothers, two brothers, one brother, two brothers, two brothers. Everything built out from that first case. It says the Gemara, Shtayim shekidshu shtei achayos. So we'll say now the Gemara is going in and darshaning on the second case. Shmamina, kiddushin she'im misruim lebiyah have kiddushin. I will say the Gemara tries to reach the same conclusion that it mentioned in the beginning of this Gemara in yesterday's daf, which is, interestingly enough, in a lot of these cases, these are marriages, right? These are relationships that cannot be consummated, in which relations would be usher, for the fear that the woman you're having relations with is not actually your wife, but rather is who? Is rather the sister of your wife. Yet, the Mishnah terms these relationships as effective forms of kiddushin, effective forms of marriage. So you see from here that even a relationship which cannot result in relations is still considered to be a complete marriage. To which the Gemara says, no, same answer like we gave before. Hachanami kishahukru l'basov nisarvu. What's the case? The case is where there was a moment of clarity, that the man knew which woman was his wife, just subsequently the ambiguity set in and then there was confusion. Meaning that there was a moment where there was clarity as to who was married to who. Because of that, there was a moment in which the marriage was solidified and concretized. And again, the confusion only sets in later on. For again, the diuk to this is the Mishnah says he doesn't know. V'lo katani ve'en yadua. See, Rabbi said there's a difference between the word eni yodea, not knowing, and eno yodua, something not known. Shmamina. So Rabbi says, see from here that Allah Lamaisa, there was a moment of clarity, and then subsequently the ambiguity and confusion set in. Because there was a moment of clarity, therefore this is what's called kiddushin hamisurin libiyah, ultimately marriage which can result in relations, and therefore halacha l'maisa would be a proper marriage. You might kamash malon. So we'll say it's the same lesson as the first part of the Mishnah, or it's the same idea, different case, but same yisod. So why do you have to repeat it? So the Gemara says, "Might kamash malon seifet shrichale," because we will say the latter case in the Mishnah is necessary. What was the latter case? Meisu. If the two men in question passed away, right? The two men were Mekadesh, the sisters. It's not clear who was Mekadesh who. Meisu l'zeh echad l'zeh shnayim. One brother left behind. One man left behind one surviving brother. One man left behind two surviving brothers. Hayachid choleitz l'shtehen. The one who has the one brother does chalitza with both of the women. Echad choleitz ve'echad miyabim. B'ashnayim, and the other side, the two surviving brothers of the second guy. Ultimately, one does chalitza, one does yipum. So pshita, haineresha, it's the same. We'll say the mechanics of the Mishnah, like we saw in yesterday's daf, are the same. The cases become more convoluted and complicated, but the mechanics, the principles are the same. So, what would you have thought? Ligzor trei atuchad. You might have thought that halacha l'maisa. In a case where ultimately we go ahead and we allow one of the surviving brothers to go ahead and do yibum, perhaps we should be concerned that halacha l'maisa, the second brother from the other side will also do yibum, and as you saw in yesterday's daf, that would be problematic. Kamashman, we're not concerned about that. The dafka Michlas v'hadar yivumi. However, the proper order, again, as we saw in yesterday's daf, has to be that first chalitza has to occur, and then only afterwards yibum. Aval yivumi bereisha lo dikapaga biyavam l'shok. But halacha l'maisa, the option of yibum cannot be exercised before chalitza because of the concern that ultimately, again, perhaps a brother who's not really the yavam will end up having relations with this woman, in which case he's had relations with a woman who ultimately, again, is standing for yibum. Fine. We'll say now just go to the last case in the Mishnah. Last case in the Mishnah was, what if each brother, each man, left behind two surviving brothers? So we'll say, so remember again, on your chart from yesterday's daf, this was table C. This was table C. This is where, again, you have Reuven and Gershon. Reuven and Gershon ultimately married Rachel and Leah. There was some ambiguity as to who married who. They pass away. Each of them go ahead and leave behind two surviving brothers. So effectively what ends up happening over here is each brother does chalitza with one woman, yibum with another woman. But the woman they do yibum with was the woman whom the brother on the other side did chalitza with. Again, you can just follow along with all of the arrows. So it says the Gemara, Hasulamali, why do I need this additional case? So the Gemara says, Hainuhach, this is the same. Again, I'll both say, the principles are the principles, right? They're all the same. They're all the same yisodos. So Maudatema, Ligzar Dilma Miyabim Velo Chalitza. Perhaps you should be concerned that maybe one of the brothers will do yibum before chalitza was performed. So the Gemara says, Kamash Malon, we're not concerned about that. Ma'ishnami had this not. So why is this different than another case? Arba achin, shnai mehen nesuin shtei achayos, umeisu hanesuin es ha'achayos. So what about the following case? 4 brothers, 2 of whom are married to 2 sisters, and then they die. So what's the halacha? The brothers married to the sisters pass away. What's the halacha? Hare'ilu choltzos v'lo misyabmos. These brothers must ultimately do chalitza and cannot do yibum. Now, we'll take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says it's 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom, right at the end of the line. Maishna meha. Rashi says, V'lo misyamos, v'katani seifa, im kidmu v'kinsu yotziu, v'hacha katani in motziin miyadan. So we'll say, actually Rashi's bringing our attention now to another point. In our Mishnah, if you remember again, in all of these cases, the Mishnah outlines a procedure. And let's say, for example, in this last case over here, the Mishnah outlines the yesod that halacha l'maisa chalitza has to occur before yibum. Yet the Mishnah said that if the brothers went ahead and married these women, we would not go ahead and remove them. We would not force them to divorce. The Gemara says that's interesting because halacha l'maisa in another case, of the 4 brothers, 2 of whom who went ahead and married 2 sisters, and then the brothers married to the sisters passed away. And so what's the halacha? The halacha is the surviving brothers have to do chalitza, not yibum. In that case, if the surviving brothers married these women, halacha l'maisa would force them to give a get. Why is that different than this case over here? To which the Gemara says is very simple. The Gemara says, Hachi hashta, in this case over here, Amud Aleph, Chavdal Amud Aleph, Hasam, Hachi hashta Hasam, Ilaman Damar Yesh Zeka. Say the problem over here, or the problem in that case over there, I should say, the Arba Achin, is halacha l'maisa. If you paskin Yesh Zeka, which was a machlokes we had last week, right? Ultimately, remember the machlokes Yesh Zeka, a fundamental machlokes about what is the nature of a bond between the Yavam and the Yevama. Ultimately, again, when a brother passes away and he leaves behind, he doesn't have children, and he leaves behind a widow, what is the relationship of his widow to his surviving brother? If you hold, now let's be clear, everyone agrees that what? That there is a connection between the 2 of them. What's the machlokes? Is there a marital bond, a quasi-marital bond between those 2 individuals, between the surviving brother and the widow? When we say yesh zeka, what that means is not only is there a bond, but there's a quasi-marital bond that exists there. So Ilaman Damar Yesh Zeka. So the problem with the case of Dalet Achin is halach, and again we're going to see that case in depth. Halach l'maaseh, if you hold Yesh Zeka, then ultimately there's a Zeka, there's a connection there. Ilaman Damar Asr Levatal Mitzvas Yavmin, Asr Levatal Mitzvas Yavmin. And I will say, if you hold it halach l'maaseh, it is prohibited to go ahead and negate the mitzvah of Yibum, then that applies over here as well. Take a look at Rashi. Tab Rashi Chavdal Ramad Aleph. Ilaman Damar Taima Mishum Da Asr Levatal Mitzvas Yavmin. V'imi Yavmei Hai Chada Dilma Mayis Idach Kodim Shiyabim V'Teitzi Achosa Mishum Achos Ishto V'Nimtza Mitzvas Yavmin Betela Al Yodenu Miyibum Mechalitza. So I will say we're going to see that halacha l'maaseh. We'll see this case more in depth. But any time unilateral action on behalf of one of the brothers has the ability to go to mavatal yibum on behalf of the other, we don't want to take such action. We're going to see this case of Dalet Achin inside a little bit more. So the Gemara says, "Hacha kol chad v'chad emor didei kames ramila." So we'll say in our Mishnah, the reason why, even though we outline certain procedures, halacha l'maaseh, if the brothers each of them ended up marrying one of these women, so the reason we don't go ahead and force them to get divorced is why. We'll say, so let's play this out. We'll say, plug it into any one of these cases in Mishnah, right? So even if you just take a look at this last case, right? So remember again, table C. So remember again, it's a very detailed process. You have Levi, right? I should say, Shimon has to do chalitza with Rachel. Kehas does chalitza with Leah. I'm in table C, row number 3, that allows Merari to do Yibam with Rachel and Levi to do Yibam with Leah. Good, we saw those mechanics yesterday. So I will say, so now what does the Mishnah say at the end of the day? If, let's say, what ends up happening over here is that Levi, Shimon does Yibam with Rachel, let's say for argument's sake, and Kehas does Yibam with Leah. Right? So remember, as much as you're not supposed to do that, the Mishnah says if they did it, we don't force them to get divorced. Why not? Why not, Rabbi saying? Because what could each of the brothers respond? What could they respond? I'm doing the mitzvah of Yibum. And Rabbi say, what are we unable to do? Tell them that they're wrong. In other words, these are cases of suffix. These are cases of suffix. So because they're cases of suffix, we try to navigate the suffix by taking all of these different steps, and we try to eliminate the doubt and create certain facts. But lamaisa, if one of the brothers or both of the brothers were to take unilateral action and marry any of these women in question, the problem is we can't force them to get divorced because halacha lamaisa, they can claim, and we can't disprove it, they can claim that halacha lamaisa, I'm just doing yibum with my brother's widow. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Kimu v'kin su'ein motziin." So we'll say, so just to analyze this last piece. So therefore, the Mishnah said, in these cases, if one of the brothers went ahead, or if both of the brothers went ahead and married these women, halach l'maaseh, we don't force them to get divorced. Listen to this: Tani Shila va'afidu shneim kohanim. I will say this is true even if what? Even if halach l'maaseh they are kohanim. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. Afidu shneim kohanim. So I'll say, so Jen, just looking at any of these tables, let's take a look at C. Just let's keep focused on table C, line 3. So remember again, in table C, line 3, you have a very specific way to deal with these complicated relationships, right? I need Shimon doing chalitza with Rachel, Kehas doing chalitza with Leah. Then Levi has the ability, should he want, to do Yibum with Leah, and Merari has the ability to do Yibum with Rachel. Okay, that's the way this case is set up. Now we'll say, but the Mishnah said, if halacha l'maaseh they did not follow this procedure, and on each side one of the brothers married one of the women, ultimately, again, we don't force them to get divorced. The Gemara now adds in, by the way, this is true even if what? We'll say, let's say both Levi and Shimon and Kehas and Merari are all Kohanim. We still won't make them get divorced. Now what's novel about that? Let's play this out for just a moment. So let's say we go ahead and Levi goes ahead and marries one of these. So we'll say, remember, there's been Yibum, there's been Chalitza. Well, actually, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Afilu shneim kohanim, v'chad menahu vaday Chalutza nosiv, deha arusas hanochri Chalutza hi me'echad mishnei echav, kidiktani kidmu shnayim b'chiltzu. Both say, now listen to this. So the Mishnah says, even if their brother is married, we would not make them go ahead and divorce their wives. Now both say, what that sounds like is, let's say even in a case where on one side, one of the brothers did chalitza, and on the other side, right, we'll say, let's say for argument's sake, let's take a look, C3 again. Let's say in this case, Kahas and Merari both do chalitza with Rachel and Leah. Let's say for argument's sake, they both do chalitza with Rachel and Leah. And now let's say Abosai, Shimon comes along and marries one of these women. Shimon is a Kohen. So the Mishnah says, even though Shimon's a Kohen, and he married her, he shouldn't have married her, but he married her, we don't force them to get divorced. Right? Now Abosai, the novelty in that is, Shimon, who's a Kohen, is married to a woman who what? May be a chalutza. To which the Gemara says something amazing. So the my timer, chalutza d'Rabbanan hi. Because I will say the prohibition for a kohen to marry a chalutza is only a d'Rabbanan. It's only d'Rabbanan. Now Rashi says Lavir midrabbanan hu. V'hacha d'lechol. So I will say furthermore. I'm sorry. Before we get to Rashi, the safek chalutza lo gazu b'Rabbanan. And I will say, remember again, this isn't just a case of chalutza. What is this a case of? Safek chalutza. Shavuot said, even though Chazal were gozer and said a Kohen can't marry a Chalutza, Chazal were never gozer to say that a Kohen can't marry a Safek Chalutza. And this is a case of Safek Chalutza. Look at Rashi. Midrabananu, V'hachad l'chol chad, Eina ela Safek, T'shema zeh yibim esivim to gimura, lo gazra bana la'afkuha, lo la'afuka misafek. So everyone said, because this is a case of Safek Chalutza, therefore Chazal did not say that the Kohen husband has to go ahead and divorce her. So the Gemara says, 1 second. The Chalutza d'Rabbanan, is that true? It's only an Isser d'Rabbanan for a Kohen to marry a Chalutza? So the Gemara says, Vatanya, we learned, Gerusha, inli ela grusha. When the pasuk says that a Kohen can't marry a divorcee, I only know divorcee means divorcee. Chalutza minayin. How do I know that a Kohen also can't marry a Chalutza? Talmud lomar v'isha. So I will say ultimately again the pasuk says v'isha. So remember again the pasuk is v'isha zona v'chalala lo yikach v'isha gerusha. Well, say, why does it have to say v'isha gerusha? Let it just say gerusha. So the Gemara Darshans, v'isha comes to teach me that even a chalutza, which I will say sounds like the Isra chalutza is what? Is daraisa. If it's daraisa, then even if it's a safek chalutza, what should be the halacha? He should have to divorce her. Safek daraisa l'chumra. To which the Gemara says, so midrabanan hu ukras machta ba'amahu. You will say ultimately again, no, it is a drabanan. It is a drabanan. It is an issa drabanan for a kohen to marry a chalutza, and the presence of the pasuk is only an asmachta. Right? Ultimately, again, we see this many times that Chazal go ahead and like to link their particular ruling to a pasuk in the Torah. So I'll say, so fascinating conclusion to this sugya. So when we learn halacha l'maisa again, the isser for a kohen to marry a chalutza is only d'Rabbanan. What about the pasuk? The pasuk is an asmachta, which is why in the Mishnah, as much as the Mishnah wants us to follow all of these mechanics for taking care of these cases of ambiguity, if the brothers on either side were to take unilateral action and marry these women, we would not make them get divorced, even if they were kohanim, because halacha l'maisa, chalutza is only d'Rabbanan, and safek chalutza is totally permitted. This is important yesod also. So chalutza is an isser d'Rabbanan, but a case of safek chalutza is totally permitted to the kohen. Beautiful. Now we'll say new Mishnah. Back to the mechanics a little bit more of Yibum. This is a really great sugya ahead of us. Mishnah, mitzvah begadol liyabim v'imkinei hakatan zacham. So we'll say Mishnah says halacha l'maisa. The mitzvah of Yibum is upon the gadol. Now I will say, we're going to discuss exactly what this term means, but for our purposes, let's say that the mitzvah of Yibum is upon the oldest brother. Ultimately, again, if the oldest brother, let's say the younger brother jumped in, right, and he performed Yibum. Literally, again, he swooped in, he performed Yibum before his older brother had a chance to decide what it was he was going to do. Halacha l'maisa, that's an effective Yibum. That Yibum works. Good. So we'll say, Tana Baran, V'haya Bechar. So remember again, we'll say the pasuk says as follows, V'haya Bechar asher teiled yakum al shem achiv hames. So here's what's interesting. The Torah says, the Bechar, the firstborn who will be born, firstborn who is born, ultimately again will stand in the name of the deceased brother. So now watch this. Mikan shemitzvah begadol liyabein. Then I will say, this is fascinating. See, when you read this pasuk, I will say, the way you could read this pasuk is referring to the child who is born from the Yibum union. Right? The Bechar, the firstborn child from this Yibum relationship, ultimately, again, will be there, right? Yakum al Shem Achiv Hames will go ahead and essentially stand in place of the deceased brother, for lo yimacha shemo mi Yisrael, and his name will not be erased from Klal Yisrael. The way the Gemara is darshaning this pasuk, Rabbi say, is, interestingly enough, it's not a reference to the child that's born. Rather, who is it a reference to? The brother who's doing Yibum, which is fascinating. So therefore, Rabbi say, what do you see from here? V'haya b'char mikan shemitzvah bigodol liyabein. You see from here that halacha lamaisa, it is a mitzvah for the gadol, for the oldest brother, to go ahead and do Yibum. Asher teleit. What do we learn from Asher teleit? That will be born. Prat la'aylin she'en yoladas. Rabbi say this comes to exclude if halacha lamaisa, the widow, is an islandess. Right? So we're talking about an islandess extensively. This is a woman who's not only barren, but a woman who does not physically mature to the ability to have children. So if the widow is an islandess, there's no mitzvah of Yibum. Because the entire point of Yibum is ultimately, again, to produce children. If we know that she cannot have children, there's no Yibum relationship. Yakum al Shem Achiv. Ultimately, again, he will stand essentially in the place of his brother, the name of his brother, Lenachala. That ultimately refers to inheritance. That Rabbi said the brother who does Yibum inherits his brother, inherits the deceased brother entirely. Entirely. Rabbi said it's very important yisod. So if you could imagine for a moment, going back to our old cases, right? When Ruvain passes away, and halacha lamaisa again, he goes ahead and he leaves behind the widow Rachel, but no children. And he leaves behind brothers, right? Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. So what we're seeing over here is from the word Bachar, the oldest brother should do Yibum. That's Aleph. Beis, right? Asher Teled, only do Yibum if Rachel is capable of having children, to our knowledge. Right? C, Yakum al Shem Achiv, the brother who does Yibum inherits the deceased brother in his entirety. In other words, the Yerusha of Ruvain is not divided amongst anyone. The entire nachal, the entire inheritance, goes to the brother who does Yibum. We're going to see, by the way, well, let's go on. So the Gemara says, so l'nachala, atom l'nachala, and l'shem, well, maybe it's not nachala. In other words, how do you know it's nachala? How do you know it's inheritance? Maybe it's talking about a name. Meaning what? The Gemara says, Sh'l'shem, Yosef, Koran Osa Yosef, Yochanan, Koran Osa Yochanan. Maybe I will say what it means is that Allah Lamaisa, when Ruvain, the surviving brother, does Yibum, and then they have a child, then what? Then maybe that child has to be named for the deceased brother. Maybe that's what it means. It doesn't mean inheritance, rather it means naming rights. To which the Gemara says, Ne'emar kan Yakum al Shem Achiv. It says over here by Yibum, Yakum al Shem Achiv, he will stand in the place of his brother. V'ne'emar lahalon al Shem Achehem yikaru b'nachal losam. And Abba said, the pasuk says, al Shem Achehem. Ultimately, Abba said, this is by Yaakov Avinu and Parshas Vayechi. Ultimately, again, when he's giving the brachas to Menashe and Ephraim, he tells Yosef, Menashe and Ephraim will be shvatim, but any other children that you may have will be absorbed into these existing tribes. In other words, he's telling Yosef, if you have any more kids, your kids don't become shvatim, right? They become absorbed. So you see over here the same lashon, Yikaru Hashem Achem Yikaru b'Nachalasam. Mashema Amar Lahalon Nachala, just like Rabbi said, the shame in Bereshis is talking about inheritance. Av Shem HaAmar Kan L'Nachala. So too over here by Yibum, when the pasuk says that ultimately again the brother will stand in the place, right? Will be called in the name of his deceased brother. It means inheritance. It means inheritance. V'lo yimacha shmo, and Rabbi say again, ultimately again his name will not be erased. It's talking about the deceased brother. Prat l'sris shishmo machui. Rabbi said, this is very interesting. What happens if Ruvain, the now deceased brother, was sterile? And we know he was sterile. He could not have children. there is no mitzvah of yibum in that situation. Why? Because Rabbi say the mitzvah of yibum is to create a scenario where the deceased brother's name will not be forgotten, so to speak. But the Gemara says if the deceased brother Ruvain was unable to have children already from the beginning, that means his legacy was never going to be perpetuated in the form of a family. Therefore, again, there's no mitzvah of yibum. In other words, Rabbi say, what you begin to see is that the mitzvah of yibum is essentially to be able to do for the deceased brother what he could not have done for himself, or what he can no longer do for himself. But if halacha l'maisa, this reality, in other words, if in reality a family was never within reach for this now deceased brother, there's no mitzvah of yibum. What does it mean if family was not in reach? It can mean one of two things. Either he was married to a woman who wasn't capable of having children, or he himself wasn't capable of having children. Under those circumstances, the Gemara says there is no mitzvah of yibum. A really incredible yisod. Amar Rava, so let's listen to this. Rava says in general, throughout the entire Torah, even though a pasuk is to be understood as it's written, right? Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuta. Pasuk does not leave its simple meaning, right? In other words, when you look at a pasuk, you interpret it in a most simple, straightforward way. Hacha asoy gzera shava afikte mi pashte legamre. Yet I will say over here, the pasuk goes the gzera shava. I will say the gzera shava that we just spoke about, which is the gzera shava of shame. It says ultimately again by yibum yakum al shem achiv, and it says by the sons of Yosef. And it says by the sons of Yosef. Al shem achiv mikaru benachalasam. We say just like Shem by Yosef refers to inheritance, Nachala, so to Shem by Yibum ultimately applies to Nachala. So we'll say all Rav is pointing out is, wow, that's fascinating. Because the Pashup Pshat in the Pasuk is what? What's the Pashup Pshat? That when you do Yibum, right, Ruvain does Yibum with Shimon's widow, right? And what, or should I say, Shimon does Yibum with Ruvain's widow. That Halacha L'Maisa, they have a child. What is the Pasuk telling me? What is the Pasuk telling me? That you should name the son what? Ruvain. That's the Pashup Pshat in the Pasuk. Name the child that comes from the Yibum union after the brother that passed away. Yet the Gzeira Shava removes the Pashup Pshat from this Pasuk and makes it talk about inheritance, to which the Gemara says, Vilav Gzeira Shava, we're not for the Gzeira Shava, Hava Amina Shem Mamish. I would have thought that when the Pasuk says, ultimately, Yakum al Shem Achiv, it literally means that when there is a Yibum union and that union produces a son, that son should be named for the deceased brother. That's Pashat Pshat. The Gzeira Shava tells me that name, Shem, doesn't mean shame, doesn't mean name. What does it mean? Inheritance. It means Nachla. To which the Gemara says, Leman kamizayir rachmana. Ultimately, again, who is the Torah addressing? Liyavam. Ultimately, the Torah is talking to the brother ultimately who does Yibum. Right? Rashi says over here, Liyavam, Kamar Rachmana, Ben Anola Lecha, Yakum al Shem Achicha, Mibayle. To which the Liyavam. So the Gemara says, Yakum al Shem Achicha, Mibayle. So ultimately, I will say, so who is the Torah talking to? If it's the Yavam, does the Torah need to tell this to the Torah should say, Yakum al Shem Achicha, Mibayle. See, I will say, here's the problem now. We just established that Yakum, the pasuk that says Yakum al Shem Achiv, ultimately again is referring to Nachala. So who is the Torah addressing? If the Torah is talking to the Yavam, the surviving brother, then it should say what? Yakum al Shem Achicha. Right? He should stand in the place of your brother. So the Gemara says, so Yakum al Shem, Yakum al Shem Achicha mibayle. Ila beidina, if it's talking to the Beis Din, then Yakum al Shem Achi Aviv mibayle. V'dama Achi Kamalu, Rachman Abba says, so again, if it's talking to the Beis Din and giving Beis Din instructions about what to do, it shouldn't have said Yakum al Shem Achiv, but rather again, it should have said Yakum al Shem Achi Aviv. V'dama Achi Kamalu. Maybe this is what the Torah is saying to the Beis Din. Amrulei liyavam yakum al shem achiv. maybe it's ultimately saying to the Yavam, ultimately, you Yavam, go ahead and stand in place of your brother. Ela asay gzera shava afikse lagamre. There will say the gzera shava comes along, and the gzera shava totally just removes everything from the pasha pshat. And I will say what the gzera shava teaches us is it has nothing to do with names, but rather everything to do with nachala, and telling us that what? That Allah maisa, again, the brother who does yibum ultimately stands in the place of his brother to fully inherit the deceased brother. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Hashta de ka'amrit kra begadol ksiv. Now that you're telling me that, so now we're jumping back. Because remember, again, we got a little bit of a tangent. What's the topic of the Mishnah? What's the topic of the Mishnah? Who does yibum? Who does yibum? What did the Mishnah say? Who does yibum? Who does the gadol, the oldest. So let's go back for a second. How do we know that? Because the pasuk says, V'haya ha-bechar. Right? The pasuk says, V'haya bechar. V'haya bechar she'teled yakom al-shiv achim. So here's what's interesting. The Gemara is darshaning that bechar is a reference to the oldest brother for yibum. The oldest brother should be the one who does yibum. So the Gemara said, listen to this. Hashta da amrit kra begadol ksiv. Now that you tell me that bechar refers to the oldest brother, that he should do yibum. So the Gemara says, Hashta da amrit gadol ksiv. Ema bechar liyavam pashat lo liyabe. Supposed to listen to this. Maybe the pasuk means like this. Maybe the only time that we do yibum is when it's the bechar, literally again the oldest brother in the family. In other words, they're both saying that maybe the mitzvah of yibum only applies to a bechar, but if it's anyone other than the bechar, maybe there's no mitzvah of yibum. Right? After all, the Torah does use lashon of bechar. So we'll say it's a fascinating havamina. So pashat, we'll say in this case, pashat means any brother who's not the bechar perhaps shouldn't do yibum. Imkain eishes achav shloi haya ba'olam d'miyet rachman alamali. We'll say if that's the case, then why do we have to go through a whole drasha, right? To go ahead and exclude what we call non-concurrent brothers, right? A brother who is born, right? A brother who is born after the deceased brother passed away, because we'll say if that's the case, you have to exclude him from Yibum. Why don't you have to exclude him from Yibum? Why not? Because he's not a Bechar. He can never be a Bechar. To which the Gemara says, maybe he comes to exclude again a maternal brother. That doesn't make sense. Hahu lo matis amrit. The Yibum menachal talachmana. We'll say that can't be, because remember again, Yibum as a whole is dependent on inheritance. And inheritance, of course, is a function of paternal relationship. The Gemara says, inheritance is only by paternally, not maternally. When both say maybe it literally means, again, this is incredible havamina. Maybe it literally means that when there is a bechar, there's a mitzvah of yibum. And when there's no bechar, what? No mitzvah of yibum. That's it. It does. But remember again, as strange as this sounds, we have to acknowledge the fact that the Torah frames the mitzvah as v'haya ha-bechar. And again, I will say, here's what's amazing. Until this morning at 5:55 a.m. when we got to this sugya, I thought that this pasuk was referring to the child from the Yibum union. The Gemara is telling us that no, it actually refers to the Yavam himself. And it's calling the Yavam the Bechar. So maybe what it's telling me is that the mitzvah of Yibum is only on a Bechar. I will say, by the way, we have concepts like that of mitzvahs that are only on a Bechar. Like for example, right? So first of all, Pishnayim, right? The Bechar has a different law of inheritance. What else? Peyona ben. So you have concepts like that halacha l'maisa again, that halacha l'maisa, right? That so maybe the mitzvah of yibum is only on a bechar, and if there is no bechar, by the way, there could be no bechar in a variety of situations. How can you have no bechar? If the bechar dies, right? If the bechar dies, or again for a variety of reasons, maybe someone doesn't have the designation of bechar. Maybe there's no yibum. Amrikra umeis echad mehen. The pasuk says one of the brothers dies. So I will say, what's interesting is the way the Torah frames yibum is kiyeshu achim yachtov umeis echad mehem. One of them dies. Now, what does that mean? One of them dies. What does that mean? Right? One of them dies means the mitzvah of yibum is triggered by what? The death of any of the brothers, including the bechar. Right? Any of the brothers, including the Bechar. So the Gemara says, Milo askinan de misbechar. Could we not be talking about a case of where the Bechar died? Va'amar rachmana liyabein katan. And the Torah is telling us, someone's got to do Yibum. even a younger brother. Maybe not. Maybe the Torah is talking about a case where a younger brother died, and the Torah is telling the Bechar, you do Yibum. So the Gemara says, ultimately, again, but the Torah excluded the case of non-concurrent brothers. Ve'ema kileka bachar kadam katan. I'm sorry. Ve'ema kileka bachar kadam katan zacha. Ve'ika bachar kadam katan lo zacha. Maybe the Torah is telling me the following. Fine. So we'll say. So let's acknowledge that maybe there is a mitzvah of yibum, even when there is, even not the bachar. There's a mitzvah even upon all the brothers. But maybe the emphasis on bachar b'osei teaches me the following. Listen to this. Maybe Shabbos say, maybe like this. When there is a bachar, when there is no bachar, if a younger brother came along and did yibum, it works. But if there is a bachar and a younger brother tried to do yibum, then what? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Maybe let's say that. Amakra ki yeshvu achim yachdov. Shabbos said the way the Torah frames the mitzvah of yibum is that there are brothers who are living together. Huksha yeshivas achim zelozeh. The Torah compares the brothers one to the other. And therefore telling us, Shabbos said, that essentially from a yibum obligation perspective, all of them are on the same level. They all have the mitzvah. There may be a difference in precedence, but Lamaisa, they're all in the parsha of the mitzvah of Yibum. Ve'ema ki ika b'char lehadra gadol ki leka b'char ein chozrin eitzel gadol. So maybe you'll say that Allah Lamaisa, when there is a b'char, ultimately again, that's when we give precedence to the oldest brother. But maybe if there is no b'char, ultimately we don't give precedence to the oldest brother. In other words, both say, so maybe the din of b'char teaches me, if there's mamish the firstborn and he's one of the brothers, he gets the first right, so to speak, of yibum. But lamais, if there's no b'char, maybe we don't look for like the oldest brother after that, and perhaps we just give we don't give any focus to precedence. The Gemara says, well, that's not true. Alama tani abayi kashisha mitzvah bigadol liyabim. Rabbi says a very important statement. The mitzvah of yibum is upon the oldest brother. Rabbi say that means oldest, even if what? Even if what? He's not the bachar. Which Rabbi say, by the way, you could have in a variety of different cases. The simplest way you have this is how? The bachar died. Right? Or for that matter, again, Rabbi said the bachar is the deceased brother. Or however you have it. Abaye says the way yibum works is that the mitzvah of yibum always devolves upon the oldest brother first. If at the end of the day, lo ratza, if the oldest brother doesn't want to, I will say, now doesn't want, holchim eitzel achil katan. Then we go to the younger brother. If the younger brother, lo ratza, we'll say, so let's say you go through all of the brothers and no one wants to do yibum, chozrin eitzel gadol. We go back to the oldest brother. Now, what does it mean go back to the oldest brother? We say, oldest brother, listen now, you have to do something. Right? It's yibum or chalitza. So essentially what we do is, according to Abaye, and it's really fascinating, we start with the oldest brother. Say, oldest brother, you have a mitzvah of yibum. Oldest brother says, no, I don't want to do yibum. Okay? We go down the order of brothers. If no one wants to do yibum, we then come back to oldest brother. We say, okay, oldest brother, you have to make it this. You have to do something. You have to do something. Yibum or chalitza. But ultimately, again, the buck stops with you with this. You have to take action. So the Gemara says, ki bechar. Ma bechar becharasa garmalo. So we'll say, in this respect, it's like a bechar. How so? Just like bechar, his status, right? His status ultimately again earns him the quote unquote right of first rights of yibum. So the Gemara says, af gadol gdulaso garmalo. Ultimately, again, so to the oldest. I will say, in other words, what we're seeing over here is when the Torah uses the word bachar by yibum, it's not coming to go ahead and highlight what we'll call the titular bachar, right? The actual halachic firstborn. Bachar just means the oldest brother. And the way the Torah is coming to tell us is the mitzvah of yibum begins with oldest brother. He doesn't want to do anything. Go down the list of brothers. No one wants to do yibum. Go back up to the first brother. Say you have to make a decision. To which the Gemara says, "Ve'ema kimi yabein bechar lishkol nachala." Maybe it means like this. Maybe it means like this. So the Gemara says, "Why don't we say when the bechar does yibum? That's when the yavam gets. That's when the yavam gets the nachala, the inheritance, the portion of the deceased brother. Kimi yabein pashat lo lishkol nachala." Maybe if another brother other than the bechar does yibum, maybe he doesn't get inheritance. That's what I will say. So okay, so now we've established that any brother could do yibum. But maybe the yibum of a Bechar is different than the yibum of any other brother. How so? Financially. That it's only when the Bechar does yibum that ultimately gets nachal. Now, why would we say that? Because remember, the pasuk we darshan before was v'hayah ha'bechar asher tele yakum al shem achid. We already established that shem means what? Shem means what? Shem means nachala. So maybe it's only when the bechar does yibum that he gets the inheritance of the deceased brother. When any other brother does yibum, he fulfills the mitzvah, but he doesn't get the nachala. To which the Gemara says, Amakra yakum al shem achiv. The pasuk says no. The pasuk talks about whoever does yibum, ultimately, again, yakum al shem achiv, inherits the deceased brother. V'harikam, and at the end of the day, whoever fills that role of doing yibum, by definition, gets the nachala. Ella bechar de karye rachmana amud beis. So we'll say, here's the problem. So now we'll say, essentially what we've done is, we've shown that what? That Bechar in this pasuk means everything but Bechar. So why do you use the word? In other words, why just say Gadol? Just say Gadol. Why do you keep saying Bechar? To which the Gemara says, it's actually coming Ligriusa. They both say, this is actually incredible. The use of the word Bechar is actually coming to limit the inheritance rights of the surviving brother. So I'll say, so here's what we have. When a brother does, so right, Reuven passes away without children, leaves behind a widow Rachel. Shimon does Yibum with Rachel. When Shimon does that, he fully inherits Reuven. So I will say, now that Gemara is saying, the Torah uses the word Bechar to describe Reuven, the Yavam, and it's coming to describe his inheritance rights. And in fact, what it's doing is it's coming to limit his inheritance rights. That when Reuven inherits his deceased brother Shimon, he inherits like a Bechar. What's unique about a Bechar? Ma Bechar eno notel berai kibemuchsak, afu eno notel berai kibemuchsak. I want to point out something amazing to you. When we speak about inheritance, so again, in this case, very simple case, right? Right, Reuven's passing away. He leaves behind a widow Rachel. Right, no complicated cases, no Safek Kiddushin, no sisters, no mothers-in-law, nothing. Right, so it's just a regular marriage. Right, Reuven passed away, leaves behind a wife Rachel. Shimon does Yibum. So what have we established? That Aloch Alamaisa, Shimon inherits Reuven. Now I will say, just want to point out, it's actually a double potential inheritance. How so? Reuven's going to fully inherit, Shimon is going to fully inherit Reuven's estate. That's number one. I will say, to make it a bit more complicated, let's say their father Yaakov is still alive, right? So ultimately Reuven predeceased his father. And let's say Reuven himself was the Bechar. So now, when Shimon inherits Reuven, he not only inherits Reuven's present estate, but ultimately what? When Yaakov the father passes away, so Shimon inherits his portion as a brother, and he's going to inherit Reuven's portion in the father's estate as well. So I will say, so again, if Reuven was the Bechar, that effectively means that when Yaakov the father dies, Shimon is going to emerge with 3 portions of the estate. The Pishnayim of Reuven, and ultimately again, the Chilik of himself. Now I will say, but here's the thing. When a Bechar inherits, a Bechar's Pishnayim is capped at what we call Muchsak. Okay, so just let's finish just a moment. Let's say again, Yaakov passes away, right? Yaakov has 2 sons, right? Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is the Bechar. Reuven gets Pishnayim. I will say, Reuven only gets double portion in assets that his father currently has possession of. That's called muchzak. He does not get a double portion in what's called ra'ui. Ra'ui are things that, let's say, Yaakov, the father, was entitled to. The simplest example of this was, he has $1 million in outstanding debts, meaning money owed to him. He's $1 million. Pishnayim doesn't touch that. Pishnayim only looks at what is only, or I should say, Pishnayim only applies to what the estate owns at the time of death. That's called muchzak, what it's currently holding on to. But anything it's entitled to, ultimately, again, Pishnayim, the double portion, does not go ahead. And I will say, the rest of the sons, in other words, that is part of inheritance. But when calculating the double portion of the Bechar, it's only based on what the estate, the father currently is in possession of at the time of death, not anything the estate is actually owed. So this is incredible. The Gemara says, the Yavam, back to our Yibam case. Reuven dies, leaves behind a widow, no children. Shimon comes along and does Yibum. Shimon now inherits his deceased brother Reuven. What does Shimon inherit? He inherits like a Bechar, which means he only inherits the estate of Reuven, ultimately that Reuven owned, that the estate owned, muchzak, but not anything that the estate was entitled to. Those monies will be dispersed or dispensed amongst other inheritors. Look at Rashi. This is incredible. So the Gemara says, Elamai hilchus akari b'char inonotel, chilik b'chor b'nachal ha'ru'uya lahem, lavo lahem, akra misas avin, elabama shemuchzak b'yad avin b'yom so. But I say only inherits pishnayim based on what the estate owns at the time of death. Therefore, Rabosai, if we bring this all together, it's actually quite exciting. So therefore, let's work backwards. The Torah calls the Yavam a Bechar. Now, Rabosai, so again, what do we establish? The mitzvah of Yibum is upon who? All of the brothers. Who does the mitzvah of Yibum begin with? Who does it begin with? The oldest brother. And Abaye says, if the oldest brother doesn't want to do anything, we go down. No one wants to do anything, go back up to the Bechar, say Bechar. Now you have to choose Yibum or Chalitza. But halacha l'maaseh, we'll see in just a moment that halacha l'maaseh, if one of the brothers jumped in and skipped the order and did Yibum, that works, because the mitzvah of Yibum devolves upon all of the brothers. If that's the case, then why go ahead and call the Yavam a Bechar? Because it's so misleading. It makes it sound like the mitzvah of Yibum only applies to Bechar. Because it's coming to tell you that the brother who does Yibum, his inheritance rights are like what? Are like a Bechar. Just like a Bechar only gets double portion and muchzak, that which the estate owns, and not roi, that which the estate is owed, so too again, the Yavam brother only inherits that which his deceased brother owned, and not ultimately what the estate is entitled to. And I will say, this is how the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Yibum v'Chalitza Parak Beis Halacha Vav. Here we go. Misha meis v'niach, it's very important. Misha meis v'niach achim rabim. Person passed away and left behind many brothers. Mitzvah al hagodol liyavim. That's Lashon the Rambam. The mitzvah is upon the oldest brother to do Yibum or Chalitza. Shneimar v'haya ha-bechor asher teled. Mipi Hashmo lamdu shenem adaber el bechar shebe'achin kolomar godla achin yocham al shem achav ameis. Rambam says bechar doesn't mean bechar. Bechar means oldest. V'zesh nemar shateled mashma sheyaldu ha'eim. Good. So I will say ultimately again. Then the Rambam says l'ratza hagodla yabim. What if the oldest brother doesn't want to do Yibum? Mechazrin al kol ha'achin. We go through all the other brothers. If none of the other brothers want to do anything, we go back to the godla. We say to him mitzvah o lachlotz o yabim. Ultimately, again, you got to do something. Chalitza or Yibum. The Rambam says, "Vein kolfin es hayavam liyabim." We don't force the yavam to do Yibum. Aval kolfin also lachlotz. Sevo say we won't force him to do Yibum, but if he's not going to do Yibum, we do force him to what? To do Chalitza. In other words, you got to do something. You got to say, not fair to this woman. You have to make a decision. Incredible, Bosai. Beautiful. Let's go back to Bosai. Now we get into a fascinating sugya. Listen to this. This is a little bit of a totally different topic, and you're going to see how it relates to Yevamos in just a moment. This is incredible. Hanitan ala shivcha v'nishtachra. Bosai, watch this. Look at Rashi. This is incredible. I don't know if I mentioned, this is an incredible sugya. Look at Rashi. Hanitan chashub. Listen to this, what I'll say. Let's say there are rumors about a man that is having an illicit relationship with a shivcha. Not a Jewish woman. So there's rumors. Nitan means there are rumors. We'll call him Reuven. That Reuven is having a relationship with a shivcha, a non-Jewish maidservant. They're both in a legal relationship. And then she's emancipated. Then I will say, what happens when a shivcha is emancipated? What happens? She becomes Jewish, right? Or what happens? There are rumors that he's having a relationship with a non-Jewish woman, and she converts. So what's the halacha? Hare ze lo yichnos. I will say the halacha is ultimately again, this man Reuven should not marry any of these women. Why not? Because I will say if he marries them, what does it look like? It looks like it confirms the earlier rumor. Right? So again, it looks, if he marries, so she's marrying, it looks like they're confirming the earlier rumor. Right? But ultimately, if he did marry them, let's say he marries the non-Jewish woman who converts, or he marries the Shivcha who's emancipated, okay, we don't force them to get divorced. Okay, fine, because it's just a rumor. Listen to this, I will say. Hanitan al ish. What happens, halacha lamaisa, if there was a rumor that a man committed adultery? Right? Reuven had an affair with Shimon's wife. And what happens? Now this is fascinating. So now what happens? Beis Din gets involved, and as a result, Beis Din made Shimon divorce his wife. Now, again, we'll discuss the mechanics of that. So Beis Din made Shimon divorce his wife. And then we'll say what happens. Then what happens? Reuven marries Shimon's wife. Right? So remember again, Reuven marries the woman about who there were rumors that he was having an affair. In that case, even though Reuven married her, ultimately, again, we force him to divorce her. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Yotzi dimidoraisa asur nami leboel didashina v'nitma. Now we'll say we're going to have to see the exact mechanics of this case. According to Rashi, the reason why Reuven has to divorce her is because when a woman commits adultery, she's prohibited to her husband and to the man with whom she committed adultery. So therefore, again, in this case over here, I will say, now again, the mechanics of this case we have to see. But two different cases. So case number one is a man is rumored to have had a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. She subsequently becomes Jewish. So what do we say to such a person? What is such a person? You should not marry this woman. Right? Because it doesn't look right. It just does not look right. There were rumors, it doesn't look right. But if he married her, legitimate marriage. Case number two, there were rumors that a Jewish man had an affair with a Jewish woman, with someone else's wife. Then again, Beis Din steps in. Why Beis Din steps in? How Beis Din steps in, we'll see. Forces the man to divorce his wife, right? And then she marries the guy with whom she was alleged to have the affair. In that case, the Mishnah says, no, we don't allow that. We force him to divorce her. Okay, let's analyze. Hag Yoris Miyahavya. Here's what's interesting. Let's go back for just a second. Let's look at this case. This is an interesting case. Let's go back to the first case. So Reuven, there are rumors that Reuven is having an affair, he's having a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. Okay. And then she converts. So the Mishnah says, ultimately, again, he shouldn't marry her. But if he married her, we don't make them get divorced. The Gemara says, well, here's what's interesting about this. Apparently, if she went ahead and she converted, that conversion works. Now, the Gemara is surprised about that. Why? Because shouldn't we be concerned that why did she convert? For this guy. Rashi says over here, Ha giyura miyahavya, v'afagav delo niskayra l'shem yados, ella b'shul she'isa enazeh. So the Gemara says, come on. I will say, you have to be dan l'kaf schus, but not dan l'kaf shtus. Right? So in other words, so at the end of the day, come on. Right? This man is having this relationship with this non-Jewish woman. Suddenly she has inspired and has such an interest in Yiddishkeit. It's incredible how that happens. Right? And suddenly again now she has this renewed interest, so she goes ahead and she converts. The Gemara says, come on. We know why she's converting. Yet the Mishnah seems to indicate that her conversion is legitimate. Even though we know that what is motivating her conversion is not a love of God, but it's probably a love of Reuven. So the Gemara yet the conversion works. So the Gemara says, is that true? Or mini, listen to this. If a man converts to marry a woman, or a woman converts to marry a man, or I will say someone converts because again, he thinks he's going to become wealthy. Right? Shulchan Malachim. He thinks he's going to become wealthy. Or L'shum Avdei Shlomo. Same idea. So remember again, we saw the Gemara before. Avdei Shlomo who were non-Jewish ultimately were incredibly wealthy as well. So in other words, the guy is converting because he thinks there's some type of financial reward. So what's the halacha? Einon Gerim de Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia says this is an invalid conversion. Because at the end of the day, the Gemara says, Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Echad Gere Arayos. Right, I will say this goes back to the Kusim. Whether someone went ahead and converted to escape the outbreak of lions, so we'll say that's the case we had before, right? In other words, they escape to avoid danger. They convert to escape danger. Vechad Gere Chalomos. So we'll say this is interesting. Or someone who converts because of dreams. Right? In other words, I will say somebody converts because they think God is talking to them, or somebody has some dreams of grandeur of what Judaism is going to do for them. V'echad Gerei Mordechai ve'Esther. This is how I will say. What's Gerei Mordechai ve'Esther? Geri Mordechai Esther means people who convert in the aftermath of Jewish victory. Right? In other words, converting when Jews are on top. Right? Everybody wants to be part of the winning team. Einam Gerim. Ultimately, again, they're not converts. Ad sheyiskairu bazman hazeh. Until people convert in this time. Rabbi says, this time, bazman hazeh, sakadaytcha elaima ki bizman hazeh. Rabbi says, listen to this. Essentially, we only accept converts when, this is incredible, when Jews are persecuted. Right? In other words, if you want to join us when we're on top, we don't accept you. Because there's a shayla about the legitimacy of such a conversion. You can only join Klal Yisrael when Klal Yisrael is like a shtigel underdog, right? When there are challenges, when there are difficulties. So the Gemara says, Ha'itmar Allah. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? What do you see from here? That Allah Chalamaisa, conversion is only legitimate if what? If you know with absolute certainty that it is free of any ulterior motives. But if halacha l'maisa, a person is converting in order to get married, person is converting in order to be wealthy, person is converting because whatever, we'll say, so ultimately any ulterior motive undermines the legitimacy of the conversion. But yet from the Mishnah, it sounds like if this woman, this non-Jewish woman converted for the sake of marrying Reuven, it works. It works. So what's going on over here? Halacha kedivrei ha'omer kulam gerim. Ultimately, and I will say that the halacha follows the one who says, if a person converts, even if they convert for ulterior motives, the gerus is good. Now, I will say there's an important qualifier in that, which is that if a person converts and there are ulterior motives, but they still have acceptance of Kabbalah's own mitzvos, Kabbalah's own malchusha, they accept Hashem, they accept mitzvos, even though there may have been an ulterior motive, that is when the conversion is. I will say this is a very, very, very complicated topic, because the notion, ultimately, again, of conversion with ulterior motives is a very dangerous thing. But Lamaisa, what the Gemara is saying, just on a simple level, is if somebody converts for ulterior motives, but the proper motivations are also. In other words, I will say what the Gemara is acknowledging is that maybe someone could have ulterior motives, but at the same time, what? Have the proper motivations as well. In other words, it could be that this woman is converting ultimately to marry this man, but at the same time is also willing to accept Hashem, willing to accept mitzvos. So the Gemara says, Kulam geravim, ihachi, lechatchila nami. If that's the case, then why not just accept them lechatchila? So the Rabasi, haser mimcha akshus peh, v'lazus svasayim. Supposed to listen to this. The pasuk says, ultimately, again, remove. So we'll say, so if that's the case that if you convert for ulterior motives, then if this man is rumored to go ahead and have the relationship with this non-Jewish woman, then just convert her. Be done with it. To which the Gemara says no. Ravasi says no, because the pasuk I said, the Gemara quotes over here from Mishlei, Haser mimcha ikshus peh, literally again, remove from yourself crookedness of mouth, velazus svasayim, dishonesty of lips. When it comes to gerus, we have to be honest about what we're doing. And to convert people just for the sake of marriage is an inappropriate and dishonest process. So the Gemara just says, Badei Tanra Abanan, Ein mekablim gerim limos HaMashiach. Now listen to this. In the Messianic era, we will not accept converts. This is incredible. And I will say this goes what we said before. In the Messianic era, we won't accept converts because halacha l'maisa, again, what's going to happen? We only accept converts when there is a challenge to being Jewish. But in the Messianic era, where there is no challenge to being Jewish, right? Whatever is going to happen in Yevamos Mashiach, the world will see the greatness of Klal Yisrael. So we're going to be on top, and whatever we're going to be on top. But Lamaisa, we don't accept converts in the Messianic era. Said historically, they didn't accept converts during the times of David HaMelech, during the times of Shlomo HaMelech, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Maikra, Hein Gur Yagur Efes Meosi Migar Itach Alecha Yipol. Aval Idach Lo. So we'll say ultimately again, what's the pasuk that seemingly supports this? The pasuk that supports this, the Gemara says, if you look at Rashi for just a moment, Migar Itcha Alecha Yipol, Migar Itcha, whoever dwells with you in your times of oppression, ultimately again will dwell with you in times of greatness and bracha. So what the Gemara highlighting is the idea is, if you want to be part of the team, you got to be part of the team when times are tough. right? You can't just get in when Mashiach swoops in and suddenly Klal Yisrael, everything is going great. Just like in the times of David, they didn't accept Gerim. In the times of Shlomo, they didn't accept Gerim. If you want to be a member of Klal Yisrael, you have to join even in the midst of difficult times. So therefore, I will say, to kind of close out this piece, what the Gemara is acknowledging is, there's a rumor that this man is having a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. Suddenly, tada, she's Jewish, right? She's Jewish. So the Mishnah says that halacha l'maaseh, he shouldn't marry her because it confirms the rumor. The Gemara says, marrying her, 1 second, let's talk about her conversion. Are you telling me that her conversion is actually legitimate? But don't we have to be concerned that there was a conversion for ulterior motives? To which the Gemara says, yes, it probably was for ulterior motives. But l'maaseh, we paskin that even if someone converts for ulterior motives, as long as the core theological components of the conversion are intact. Kabbalah's ol machshuvah, acceptance of Hashem. Kabbalah's ol mitzvos, acceptance of mitzvos. We don't like such a conversion, but technically speaking, such a conversion. I'll just end off very quickly one last piece. The Mariel says something incredibly beautiful based on this Gemara. He says the same way that when Mashiach comes, we're not going to accept Gerim, we won't accept converts. The Mariel writes, listen to this. He says, Dehu adin de'ein mekablin tshuva l'mos haMashiach. He also can't do tshuva when Mashiach comes, right? Because the same way you can only convert when there's a theological challenge. You can only do tshuva when there's a theological challenge as well. If the worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes crystal clear and there's no challenge, nothing bombarding it, the Mariel says you can't be makabel gerim when Mashiach comes. You can't do tshuva when Mashiach comes, and therefore again the Mariel said, "V'amar Musar mishum zeh sheyimaher kol adam loshuv." That's it, Rabosai. I have to do tshuva today. Whatever is outstanding. Me'acher da'anu mitzapin Yeshua b'chol yom. Because Rabosai, don't wait for Mashiach each and every day. Umisha eno shav. And someone who doesn't do Mashiach, doesn't do tshuva before v'yavo Mashiach, mihira b'yameinu, shuv lo matzi lashuv v'yishar chas v'shalom b'chatav. So says the Mariel, when Mashiach comes, there's no Gerim. Mashiach comes, there's no tshuva. And therefore I will say, if there is work we have to do, maybe Zochem Yeres Hashem to do that tshuva work today. Shkach, I will say.